Doesn't say anything about no Lakeside chats for the vinyl community, does it? Hey, it's Mazzy. Here's another Lakeside chat. This time from the east side of Lake Washington. I'm in Bellevue. It's 4th of July when I'm recording this, but this is debuting on the following Friday. Actually, a week from today. I already had one today, but I happened to be over here and I got this great lake here with lifeguards and can you see that? All kinds of stuff. I want to talk about Moby Grape because this reminded me of Moby Grape. Moby Grape must be the unluckiest band of the San Francisco scene back in the 1960s. I saw them once, somewhat early, but not early enough. Unfortunately, I saw them in 1969. Was the first time I saw them, kind of the tail end of that first incarnation. Two of the members went off bonkers. I think it was Jerry Miller. Was it Jerry Miller? Or Bob Mosley? I forgot which one. Of course, Skip Spence, who had been in the Jefferson Airplane before that. Mental health issues. Little cuckoo in the cabeza. Skip Spence did that fabulous, problematic solo album that has become sort of a cult classic over the years. Check that one out. This Skip Spence album, but I bought the Moby Grape album when it came out on Columbia Records, and it had that wonderful portrait of them in front of the antique shop, photographed by Jim Marshall. Certain versions of it, after the first pressing, they cut the finger. They cut the flipping off finger, retouched it out, which is kind of strange at the time. Also, if you look on the cover to the right, there's an American flag there, and one edition it's painted red. One edition is painted black. I believe not until maybe the CD era did it show its true colors of American flag. And that kind of makes sense in a weird way, but in a weird way it doesn't. It was about sort of, this is during the anti-war movement, and they didn't want to look too patriotic, kind of a silly thing. But Columbia fucked them over because they thought in their promotional wisdom, Columbia Music didn't know how to promote rock and roll. They were late on it. I think Clive Davis did sign Janis Joplin after seeing her at Monterey in '67. And then all the labels did come to San Francisco to sign bands after the success of the Jefferson Airplane. And Columbia did not only sign Moby Grape and of course Janis Joplin and Big Brother, but they also would sign Santana, which they did very well with. For a while, or pretty well with, especially on Abraxas, although that first album is great. But I digress. Moby Grape. So what Columbia did in the promotion on that first album, they released 5 singles. Now, they didn't get any help from their manager, Matthew Katz. Matthew Katz, who just died in the last couple of years, he really ruined a lot of bands, and he signed horrible contracts. At least the band signed horrible contracts with him, where he owned everything, the music, the name, everything. So Moby Grape couldn't even use their name on future versions of the band. They went through a period when they were called a Grape. He also owned It's a Beautiful Day in that name, and it became David LaFlame's Beautiful Day at one point after Whitebird. That was also on Columbia Records. So, Matthew Cates might have gotten decent contracts for his clients, but they were all geared toward him and not the bands. But on that first album, Columbia releases 5 singles, so radio didn't know what to play. And what was different about Moby Grape, they had 3 guitar players plus a bass player, so they were a kick-ass live band. They also had a little bit of a psychedelic, but they weren't the true psychedelic band. They had a more sort of a funky country R&B rock and roll sound rather than the psychedelic sound. They did some jams and things, but they weren't like the Dead or even the Airplane. The Airplane did a lot of long psychedelic jams. If you listen to Blessed's Point Little Head, you'll hear it all over that record. And to me, they were the best live band. The Airplane initially, and the Grateful Dead sort of took over once they kind of got their act together and found their sound and their vibe. But Moby Grape, man, that first album, Omaha, I mean, that single explodes out of the gate. It should have been a hit. You know, it's become sort of a cult hit or beyond a cult hit. It's a killer 45, killer song. Beautiful songs like 805. That song, the inspiration was that when one of the members drove off the Golden Gate Bridge, drove across the Golden Gate Bridge from Marin County, and as soon as you went through the toll plaza in the day, the big giant clock said 805, and what a great song. Of course, there's Naked If I Want To, the first version, the acoustic version on there. Their second album would be a different version, a little more sped up electric version. But the reason I thought about Moby Grape, you know, when I'm here doing these Lakeside chats, usually I have records to showcase. So there's going to be records up here somewhere. There's going to be the first record, and then Wow. Now Wow is kind of what got me inspired to do this video, because I'm at the lake. Now, if you know Wow, it was a disappointing album at the time, but I think it's a brilliant album. Murder in the Hearts for the Judge. There's a bunch of good vibes on that record. There's kind of again some country soulful stuff on that record, and I actually quite like it, but it took me a while. It also came with a second LP, a blues jammy thing. But the one thing that was kind of strange is at the end of side one, the old radio personality Arthur Godfrey does an introduction that the last track is cut at 78 RPM. It's a Just Like Gene Autry, a foxtrot, and it's one of those old-timey radio at the top of the sea, some bar in Secaucus, New Jersey, kind of the top of the Mark Hopkins, or the top of the Cock, which is the top of the Hancock building in Chicago, or of course Rockefeller Center, any of the old-time deco bars in urban cities where you'd have cocktails and ballroom dancing, and it's kind of a kitsch thing. Of course, now most people don't have 78 players to play them. I do have a dual turntable on my second system, so whenever I want to play that record, I have to go downstairs. I can't play that song on my main system. But as I was saying, it came with a second bonus, like a free record, a jam record called Grape Jam. And the producer of those first few Moby Grape albums, as well as the Santana albums, was David Rubinson. He was a Columbia staff producer, and I think he produced most of those at the Columbia Studios on Folsom Street in San Francisco. Years later, he would buy the studio, turn it into the Automat, and it was one of the premier recording studios in San Francisco, of course, until the record plant was built in Sausalito in the 1970s. But it was a great, great studio. I just was in it only once when it was the Automat, but a cool place. But David Rubinson was an excellent producer, did a lot of great things, not just for Columbia, but worked on a lot of amazing records. He might have been a staff producer initially for Columbia, but then he went independent on his own. Great stuff. Going back to the premise of this video, on the lake, on this Lakeside chat, the lake, on that jam record, on Grape Jam, there was a jam with Moby Grape just doing blues numbers. They had a blues country sound, and they were jamming also with Al Cooper and Mike Bloomfield. This is around the time of, think of Super Session, produced by Al Cooper. So it's kind of a fun record, but there's one track on there, the final track, I believe. I'm not sure if it's the last song on the entire album or the last song on side one. It's called The Lake. Now, in 1968, there was a contest on KFRC radio in San Francisco, the premier AM station. I think there was a subsequent contest in Los Angeles, and the winner would have their lyrics on the next Moby Grape album in terms of the San Francisco contest, and I believe it was Buffalo Springfield was it KRLA, I believe, in Los Angeles. And I forgot which song. I think it was the second and a half record, depending on if you know what I'm talking about Buffalo Springfield. But The Lake lyrically was put on the record, and instead of writing a proper song musically, It's kind of an aural as in aural, not oral, montage. The lake, and at the end of it, the author says his name, or the singer, one of the members of Moby Grape, or the producer says his name.
Michael Hayworth.
The lake won the contest. I entered the contest, but I have no idea what I entered. I wish I had a copy of it today because I would have been 13 or 14 years old. I did not win, but it would have been so cool to have lyrics you wrote on a Moby Grape album or a Buffalo Springfield album. So that is Chat, Lakeside Chat today, a Friday. Moby Grape, they did put out other albums, Moby Grape 69, Moby Grape, a bunch of records. And there's something wonderful about some of those records. And going back about, I don't think it was maybe 15 years ago, 18 years ago, Sundays had a reissue program of putting out the first 3 or 4 Moby Grape albums on vinyl and compact discs, and they were released. And right after that, Bob Irwin, the head of Sundays, had to retract them because that fucker Matthew Katz sued them, a cease and desist order. So unfortunately, to this day, the Moby Grape albums have not been properly reissued in the last 15 years. Those need to be reissued. There was a Columbia sort of a 2-record CD set or a 2 CD comp that came out a while back during the CD era, but those records need to be reissued on vinyl, and hopefully whoever now is the beneficiary of the Matthew Katz estate, maybe they can come to some kind of resolution, because Moby Grape's an important band that needs good representation in terms of records, and especially that first album, but even Wow to maybe a somewhat slightly lesser extent, are 2 great records that should be out and should be issued and should be available for buyers of popular music. So thanks for watching Lakeside Chat. Mazzy loves you.